Welcome back to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
And my name is Adam Jones. Today we're taking you through the best bits of I Am Malala. Spoiler alert here. The girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban.
That is a real spoiler, isn't it? I suppose everyone knows the story.
No, I didn't necessarily. And Malala Yousafzai is the name.
There you go.
You had to Google that to pronounce it. Well, I think we got there.
When Malala was born in Pakistan, people commiserated with her mother. Nobody congratulated her father. She says that she was a girl in a land where rifles are fired in celebrations of a son, but daughters are hidden away behind a curtain. Their role in life simply to prepare food, clean the home, and give birth to more children.
As she grew up in her local neighbourhood, she made friends with another family in the street, and she became pals with her daughter about the same age. So the five of them tried to play cricket on the streets together, but she knew as she get older, she wouldn't be allowed to play with the other mates out there.
The two daughters, they were going to be expected to stay home and cook and serve their brothers and fathers. And while boys and men could roam freely about town, Malala and her mother, they could not go outside without a male relative to accompany them. So if her mum wanted to go to the bazaar to pick up some food, at the very least, she had to bring her 5-year-old son with her just so that she wasn't outside alone without a male.
That is insane. So the 5-year-old lad is looking after the mother. So this is a different planet to what we're used to. It's
same
insane,
planet,
man.
Same planet, but yeah, different country, I suppose. Yeah,
Different.
same.
Well, very, very different.
Seems like
mate.
a different planet, maybe.
Seems like a different planet. But for Malala, she was looking around and she was obviously inspired from some things. And she thought, hey, I'm never going to be like that in my life. I'm going to be a bit different. And maybe it was her father who planted the seed, because she'd tell anyone out there who would listen, look, Malala's going to be different. She's going to be as free as a bird.
She dreamed of going to the top of Mount Elam. She, like Alexander the Great, she wanted to touch Jupiter. But as she watched her brothers running across the rooftops, flying their kites, skillfully flicking the strings back and forth to cut each other down, she started wondering how free a girl in her country could ever be.
Malala's father came from a large family. So he had one older brother and 5 sisters, and they were from the city of Bakana, in which it was very, very primitive. So they all lived together in one little ramshackled house with a bit of mud for the roof, and it kind of leaked with water and got really cold any time it rained and snowed.
As in most Pakistani families, all the women and girls stayed home while the men went to work and the boys went to school. The father said, the young girls in his village, they're just sitting around at home, they're just waiting to get married.
It's not much of a very exciting life, you could say, for those who are just sitting around waiting to get married, and that's all. And school wasn't the only thing that the aunts and the cousins, they missed out on. Every morning, even when they're trying to get a bowl of ice cream to add to the tea, the sisters...
I think
what did I say?
Just a little dash of cream. Maybe not a bowl of ice cream in the tea.
Jeez, that was a bit of a Freudian slip. And the sisters, they were just given black tea only, where their friends were given the Neapolitan ice cream to go with the tea.
That's right. Maybe a bit of honeycomb in that tea as
Still
well.
with eggs, mate. I wouldn't do well here because I love my omelette every morning. So the eggs, they went to the boys, and eggs never went to the girls.
Yeah, if there was a chicken slaughtered for the family dinner, the girls got the wings and the neck, while the boys got that juicy, delicious breast meat. The father was saying just from early on, he could just feel he was kind of treated differently from his sisters.
So Malala's father thought there was nothing more important than knowledge and learning. So even though he had no contacts and no money, he always had this big lifelong dream that he wanted to be someone who opened a school.
When he went to school, it was just one small building. Most of the classes were taught actually on the bare ground outside under a tree. But like the millions of girls in the country, his sisters, they did not go to school at all. He felt pretty lucky to have the gift of education, even if it meant there were no dunnies and he had to, when nature called, he had to head out to the fields out the back to do his business.
So he thought the lack of education was the root of all Pakistan's problems. Ignorance is what allowed politicians to fool people and the shitty administrations to get re-elected, the ones who are really corrupt. He believed that school should be available for everyone, right? Like, so rich, you're poor, boys, and most importantly, girls. So this was his dream. And even though the pay was miserable, you're not going to be earning the big bucks. He's on 1,600 rupees a month, which is what, $20 a month? But he imagined the freedom that could come and the change he could bring in the world if he was able to run a school of his own. So this independent thought he wanted to encourage, and he hated the way most schools rewarded obedience instead of open-mindedness and creativity.
So after working as a teacher for a little bit, he decide to set up his own shop. He'd set out with pretty lofty ambitions. He sort of got everything done up. He created those dunnies so people didn't have to go out to the fields. He had desks, he had chairs. Everything was kind of ready for the big launch. But unfortunately, not that many were convinced of his grand vision, because on the first day of school, he only had 3 students.
3 students. Most people...
It's a pretty small school.
Yeah, pretty small school. You'd almost just pack up shop, wouldn't you? Pretty awkward for the 3rd student who rocks up and goes, "Is this it?" You're probably trying to find another school. So it was pretty wild ride at the start. Hardly anyone rocked up, but eventually Johnny number 4 rocked up, and then there was number 5, 8, and all of a sudden you got 15. So it's pretty hustling and bustling class at this stage.
Yeah, he wasn't deterred. From the very start, he'd always start the school day with the national anthem and raising the flag. And even from, those very measly numbers early days, he was still giving it his all. And eventually it grew and grew and grew. And he eventually created a 2nd school. And then he had a 3rd school. And for Malala, she was kind of loving it. She was just a very young child at this point. And she says that basically the school was her playground. When she was a toddler, she just roamed around to the different classrooms, sat on her different classes, went up and sat up the front with the teachers, and sometimes tried to mimic what the teachers were teaching. And basically she says she grew up in a school.
She was doing everything: badminton, drama, cricket, art, even singing, although she wasn't that very good at singing like a lot of us. But that was a really important thing, that she got the opportunity to go for it. And at the age of 7, she was the top of her class. She was obsessed with education. And she'd be the one out there, Lisa Simpson out the front, putting her hand up, being a bit of a nerd, helping out all her pupils if they had any difficulties.
That's right. But then tensions started to rise. This new bloke rolled into town. He called himself the Mufti, which is like an Islamic scholar or an authority on Islamic law. Even though he wasn't actually a Mufti, it was more of a self-anointed thing.
Self-proclaimed Mufti.
If I was just like, I'm a bit of a professor of something, just claiming it. You're not actually a professor, but you're claiming that you are. But
there's a lot of doctors out there like that. You can get a doctor of anything. I don't want to go there because
they've done the
no. You got a doctor of engineering. You got a doctor of philosophy. You're not a doctor.
Oh,
I'm probably offended about a good chunk of our audience.
If they got the piece of paper, I'm saying this guy, he's just claiming it without the backing.
Yeah, so I'd say doctors as your traditional one, but maybe I think you're outdated,
off there, mate. I think you're off.
Sorry, doctors.
So the school was kind of going all right. The dads, they had about 800 students at this time. Malala's mother, she was able to buy nice clothes for the first time. But this new Mufti roaming around town, he'd been watching this whole time.
So he said, "I'm representing good Muslims, and we think your girls' school is haram and a blasphemy. You have to close it. Girls should not be going to school. A girl is so sacred she should be in purdah, and so private that there's no lady's name in the Quran, as God doesn't want her to be named."
There was a bit of back and forth. Malala's dad was saying, well, there actually is a woman in the Quran. Then they kind of got into the nitty-gritty back and forth, fighting over if she was actually in it or if she was just there as a bit of a figure piece. But
I think Malala's father rolled him by the sounds of it.
If someone claimed to be a mufti who's the expert on all things, Islamic teachings, he might have got one wrong there, or might have been reading his own version of it. But then Malala's father just turned to the group. The mufti had assembled a bunch of esteemed gentlemen from around town, and Malala's father said, when this man, this self-acclaimed mufti, when he passes me on the street, I look at him, I greet him, I give him a nice greeting, Assalamu alaikum, but he doesn't answer. He just bows his head and looks away from me. The mufti, he looked a bit embarrassed.
Doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think in that culture, if you're saying Assalamu alaikum, you just say back.
Give it back,
I think it's Mila comes to lie or whatever, straight back as your default. So he's a bit of an asshole, in other words, I think.
And he turns to the esteemed gentleman and says, "Well, you're running this haram school. That's why I don't want to greet you." But then one of the other guys in the back, who was just kind of listening and watching on this whole time, he said, "I heard rumors that you're an infidel, but I'm in your home now and I see Qurans everywhere." And he says, "Well, of course there are Qurans. I'm a Muslim just like you. We pray to the same God. We read the same teachings." So there's a bit of tension here, I guess, in ideologies.
Eventually, they got back to the discussion of the school, and the Mufti said, "Look, there's men in reception, and I see the girls enter the school. They shouldn't be entering the same spot. This is really bad." So they found a compromise. Malala's father, he said, "Look, the school has another gate. I'll let the girls enter through the other gate." And they weren't happy really, either of them, on where they compromised, where they ended the discussion there and moved on.
Malala was 10 years old when the Taliban first came to the valley. It seemed to her like the Taliban, they kind of arrived in the middle of the night like vampires. They just kind of appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. They were always sort of traveled in groups. They had knives and Kalashnikovs.
Jeez.
Just rolling around. It's a pretty serious weapon to be carrying around with you. She said they had their black turbans. She said to her they always kind of seemed dirty. They seemed, I guess, like different. It was. I suppose it'd be pretty intimidating to have those people just rolling in out of nowhere unexpectedly.
Yeah, absolutely. So they wore black badges. It said some wild stuff, Shariat ya Shahadat, which is Sharia law or martyrdom, and sometimes black turbans. So their leader was Maulana Sufi Muhammad, and he was the founder of we'll call it the TNSM movement, or in English, the Movement for the Enforcement of Islamic Law. So they were going hard at this stuff. And the group was founded by Sufi Muhammad, and they had men who'd already fought in Afghanistan and had, fought and died for the Taliban.
In 2002, there was a bit of a roundup of militant leaders, and Sufi Muhammad, he was chucked in prison. And so a new bloke stepped up, Fazlullah. He stepped up, and what he first did really to sort of take hold was he started this illegal radio station. It became pretty popular. He kind of entered the arena at the perfect time. He was kind of able to seize the zeitgeist a little bit and really started to spread messages quite, I guess, tamely and quite moderately at first, and then gradually ramping it up to more extreme and more aggressive views over the months once he'd sort of built an established loyal following.
Yeah, well, there's something that everyone wasn't happy with, and that was just the corruption of the government. So speaking of the corruption of the government, we're going to clean all this up. You're probably going to get a strong base to begin with, and then probably a bit of commitment and consistency. Once people commit to that person, they're probably going to stick with him, and he can actually, through that influence, take people a bit more extreme than they would be otherwise. But he got pretty extreme, didn't he?
Yeah, one example, after he'd sort of, building slowly for months and months, getting a bit of a following, then he says, okay, well, we've got this apparent polio vaccine that's supposed to be rolling into town, but, Fazlullah, he said, no, actually, this is an American plot. The Americans are coming in here to give us this bizarre, thing that we don't know anything about. They say it's a vaccine, but really it's actually a plot to make Muslim women infertile so that the people in our country will all eventually die out. And Fazlullah, he says, to cure a disease before its onset is not in accordance with Sharia law, so you will not find a single child drink a single drop of this vaccine anywhere in our village.
Jesus, it sounds a bit like the Alex Jones version, doesn't he, of Pakistan?
That's right.
You got into Jonesy a fair bit.
Oh, yeah.
What was the most extreme one? The Chinese and test tube babies eating them or something like that. There's a lot of that stuff going on. So pretty similar. But one day, Sufi, he proclaimed from jail that there should be no education for women, full stop. And he said if someone can show any example in history where Islam allows a female madrasa, what's a madrasa? They can come and piss on my beard. That's a pretty strong statement.
That's right. It's like a school for teaching effectively. But yeah, he's putting a bit of skin in the game there. He's saying if there's any evidence of this, come piss on my beard. So he's pretty confident in his views.
Oh yeah, unless he's got into some kinky weird shit.
Maybe he said something that he knew he was definitely going to get wrong just to get a few takers to come along. But what they the radio man Fazlullah started doing then was he started congratulating girls who dropped out of school. He says, Miss X of Village Y, she stopped going to class at grade 5. I congratulate her. Or Miss So-and-so, she stopped going to school and now she will go to heaven. So they were really a lot of girls were slowly dropping out of school because of these people's views, but they called Malala and people like her, the girls who were still going to school, they labelled them the buffaloes and the sheep.
Yeah, that's not good. So Malala was thinking, why is this so wrong? Why do they want girls to go to school? Her father said they're scared of the pen, which is an interesting metaphor. I think her father always talks about the pen as if it's a weapon that can go against people throughout the book. But really, everyone around her was starting to drop like flies. So, for example, another teacher at her school, and he had long hair, he said, I'm not teaching any girls at this school. And of course, the dad, he didn't stand for that, and he fired him straight away. And really, at every step of the way, her father would not step down.
Malala's mother said to her, you should be wearing this purdah, this head coverings and face coverings. The mother would tell her, hide your face, people are looking at you. But Malala always replied, well, it doesn't matter, I'm looking back at them too. And Malala was always standing up for her own sort of personal freedoms.
Well, what age is she here?
She's like 10.
She's
10 or
like
11.
10 or 11 at this stage and saying things like that. So there's a bit of a lion deep down, really, you can say at this stage. And Fazlullah, he just started getting more and more extreme. He said, on this Eid, which is a bit of a holiday period, he said, 2-legged animals will be sacrificed today.
At first you're thinking, because normally, they might be, sacrificing a goat or a sheep as part of the festival, but when you're saying 2-legged animals, you might be thinking, oh, what's a 2-legged animal? Like a chicken or something? But then they realize, oh, he's talking about humans.
Yeah, humans.
And they went out and did a bit of a roundup. They kind of picked out a lot of the secular and nationalist parties, like the ANP, the Awami National Party. One of a friend of theirs was kidnapped in his village by 80 masked gunmen. He was a very wealthy family, and they found him a day later, dumped in his family's ancestral graveyard. His arms and legs had all been broken, and basically they went on a bit of a roundup to. They were getting pretty serious here.
Yeah, well, very, very serious. Like if you're someone a friend or a friend starting to die, it's starting to get pretty close to home, and the stakes just kept rising and rising, and the danger seemed to creep closer and closer to where they were. So even Fazlullah's, I think I've pronounced his name different every time, but his headquarters, they were just a few miles away, and even though the Taliban weren't next door in the street, you'd always sense that they were creeping closer to where they were.
Initially, the authorities had turned a bit of a blind eye over the first one or two incidents that happened, but eventually the Pakistan army had come into their village or their valley to try to drive out the Taliban. They wanted to drive them out of Pakistan and back into Afghanistan. It was a bit of a fierce battle. Both sides gained ground at different points. There was a hell of a lot of bloodshed. Ultimately, the army won the first battle. The Taliban subsided a bit. But the problem was Robert Greene's 33 Strategies of Law, they didn't go all the way. So the Taliban, they kind of subsided. They went back into hiding, but they didn't drive them out of the country altogether.
So the Taliban, they started fighting the war differently. They started targeting politicians, MPs and the police, and all the ones who weren't observing Sharia law or just not even wearing a long enough beard or any of that extreme stuff that they weren't adhering to. They'd sort of start picking them off. So it was very dark days, and the only thing that kept Malala going through this period was school. She carried her books everywhere with her, and when she saw someone from the Taliban, she'd have to hide them away. And their family culture even had their father saying things like, the most beautiful thing in a village in the morning is the sight of a child in a school uniform. But, it's at that point now where they're too afraid to wear the uniform.
They were moving up, they were getting closer to high school, and their school had kind of been a haven from all the horrors that were going on outside around them in the streets sort of every day. But the schools were becoming under threat too. A lot of the girls continued to drop out of school. Fazlullah, with his illegal radio show, kept broadcasting that the girls should be staying home. And if they didn't stay home, his men would start roaming around town and start blowing up schools.
So this is some wild stuff. It was very hard to imagine if you were going through this. I'd say for most of us who have never gone in a situation like this, you're probably going to shut the hell up and sort of just get in your shell because there's real stakes on the line. And this isn't obviously what happened to Malala and her father, because he had actually a poem that he kept in his pocket by Martin Niemöller, and he lived in Nazi Germany. You can say it's very, very similar what they're going through here than what Nazi Germany went through. I believe Hitler started off as a moderate and then got more and more extreme to the day everyone's like, Jesus, is it going this far? And it actually got to that point. But the quote said, "First they came for the communists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics and I didn't speak out because I was not a Catholic. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me."
Yeah.
Pretty powerful quote.
Very powerful quote. It's easy to sort of turn a blind eye. Fazlullah's saying young girls shouldn't be going to school. It's easy to just ignore that because you're not a young girl trying to go to school. But the more it kind of ramps up and gets closer and closer, soon there might be not too many people left to speak up for you if you're one of the people they target next.
And it really came to their doorstep about what they should do because the media was around and they were sort of just jumping on anyone who would speak up, who had the courage to do it. Everyone was scared. They'd love to speak to someone who's young, but obviously the parents saying, "I'm not letting my child speak to the media because I'm going to make them too dangerous." But they obviously had a very unique family because they obviously had a father who wasn't scared and who stood by her daughter. And then they obviously had a daughter who had the heart of a lion, you could say.
Absolutely. She started giving interviews to the media. Obviously, she was a little bit scared, but she was brave enough to continue to keep going to school and keep giving more and more interviews. And the more interviews she gave, the stronger she felt support was coming from all around her. She was only 11, but she looked older and obviously a lot more mature. The media loved hearing, a real story from a young girl, not just somebody talking about what it's like to be a young girl, but actually a young girl herself. And in her heart, she kind of felt, she was going to be protected. She was speaking up for her rights, the rights of herself and the rights of all girls. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was doing things by her religion, by her God, as she believed it. And she thought, not only did she have the ability to do it, but she actually almost like had the duty and the responsibility to do this for all girls in her country.
So as she was speaking, at the same time, the Taliban was still ramping things up. And it got to the point where they said that no girls in our country can go to school anymore. So it's like she's thinking, how the hell can they let 50,000 girls from going to school in the 21st century? And you could imagine right now, right? You got Malala, who's speaking on these little radio interviews and things like that. And she's pretty much just going toe-to-toe with the Taliban indirectly at this stage as Taliban are ramping up their laws.
She kept holding out hope that, something would happen, somebody would step in, someone would intervene, that, surely they're not going to close down all the schools. But finally, sort of deadline day arrived. It was the 14th of January, the day that Fazlullah and the Taliban said that, this is the last day. And their school closed. They swore they'd be the last school to close. So they kind of stayed open as long as they possibly could. But eventually they also succumbed to the pressure and closed the school. And that was kind of it for now for Malala's schooling.
So on this day, the journalists wanted to find out what the people in the community thought of this, and the stakes were risen again, now on the global stage, because the New York Times had rocked up and thought, what the hell is going on here? And they're the ones who went straight to Malala's house. And again, she had the decision, because if she's gone on this global scale, and remember the Taliban hate the West, and she's speaking to the Western media about the Taliban, she's really starting to put a target on her own head at this stage.
She didn't want to stop learning. She was 11 years old and she kind of felt like she was losing everything. She was losing her schooling. She was losing out on all the knowledge that she could have learned. She was losing out on opportunities. So it was pretty important to her. But she said, she kind of believed, or she hoped that, the Taliban, they're not going to go through with this. Surely they're just like politicians, they talk and talk and talk, but they won't actually do anything. And she kept saying this whole time through to all her friends, to all the media, no, it's not actually going to happen. We're still going to go to school. But really when the day when that finally came and the school actually did close, it was a pretty tough day for her.
So she told the New York Times, education is education. We should learn everything and then choose which path to follow. Education is neither Eastern nor Western. It is human. And the mother, who's a bit more traditional, was getting worried because Malala's saying all this with her face uncovered and really out there open to the world.
4 days after this ban on girls' schools, 5 schools were destroyed. They were bombed, and I was thinking, what the hell? Everyone's kind of done what you want to do. The girls have stopped going to school, but still they're destroying schools. It was pretty confusing to her. They were still just really, distraught. They were confused. Where's this going next? What's going to happen next? Eventually, the public pressure was kind of turning against the Taliban, saying, this is a bit much, guys. Come on, ease up a bit. And the public pressure kind of built to demand the Taliban just to ease their harsh rules a little bit. So they thought, okay, we'll ease it a tiny bit. Instead of a blanket ban of no girls in school, we're going to say, okay, you're allowed to go to school up to 10. Any girl older than 10 is not allowed to go to school.
And Malala was 11 in year 5. So again, she went against their orders and sort of snuck into the school and trying to look younger than she was, dressing in a different way so she could sneak in and just keep getting her education. So this stage, she's really on the global scale and she was starting to be nominated for awards around the world. So one in 2011, which was a children's advocacy group in Amsterdam called Kids' Rights. Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa was speaking her name, and her voice really was becoming stronger and stronger on the global scale about her criticisms of the Taliban.
She didn't win that award, but it was a pretty epic one to be nominated for. But then what she did do, she won Pakistan's first ever National Peace Prize. That'd be a pretty massive thing to win. A lot of the times you think that'd be an awesome achievement, and it obviously was an awesome achievement. But also, like, a lot of her family and her friends were thinking, it's a good achievement, but it's also a bloody big target as well. It's kind of ramping up the publicity, ramping up the focus. It's a blessing and a curse.
And all this came to a T on Tuesday, the 9th October 2012. Wasn't the best of his days because anyone who's been to school and middle school, you got your exams, and it's not the best because you're so nervous of it. But she got through it. She did pretty well on the exam and then went back on the bus to go home.
There's 2 bus trips taking kids home every day. They normally got the first one, but this time, a friend said, "Oh, we've just had our exam. Let's chill out for a bit. Let's get the second bus today." And Malala, she was a bit hungry, but because she was 15 at this stage, she was no longer allowed to go outside on the street. So she got one of the young boys to go out and buy her a corn cob from one of the street stalls, and they were just kind of hanging out, having fun, just chilling. And when the bus came along and it was time to jump on the bus to go home, all the girls covered their faces before they emerged out the front door of the school and climbed into the bus. But of course, Malala, she wore a scarf over her head, but she never covered her face.
So they're on the bus. The road up the small hill is usually busy as it's a shortcut, but that day was really quiet for some strange reason. Malala was thinking, where the hell are all the people out on the street? And at the same time on the bus, there was all the normal jovial banter that goes on. All the girls were singing and chatting and their voices were bouncing around on the bus. They couldn't really see at the very front of the bus. But what happened was a bloke with light-coloured clothes stepped into the middle of the road and waved the bus down.
He said to the driver, "Is this the Kushal school bus?" And the driver's saying, "Well, mate, it's a bit of a fucking stupid question. It's written on the side. Yeah, this is the bus."
It is.
He said, "Well, I need some information about some children on this bus." And the bus driver said, "Well, go to the school office and find out. There's nothing I can tell you here." And then, whilst this was going on at the front of the bus, another bloke had popped out and was heading towards the back of the bus while the driver was sort of occupied. And one of the girls spotted this bloke approaching the back of the bus. And they said, "Oh, look, it's one of those journalists. Oh, he's probably, all these journalists that you're speaking to, Malala. Maybe it's probably someone else coming along to do an interview."
So he was a pretty weird-looking journalist because he had a peaked cap and had a handkerchief over his nose and mouth, as if he had the flu. That's what they thought. And he looks like a college student because he was so young. But he ran onto the bus and leaned right over toward them and said, "Hey, who of you is Malala?"
No one said anything, but there were a few sneaky glances looking sideways across to Malala just to see what she was doing. And of course, she was the only one without her face covered. So he probably could take a fair guess which one was Malala. That's when he lifted up a black pistol. He lifted up his Colt 45. Some of the girls screamed. One of Malala's friends said that she squeezed her hand a little bit, but she tried to remain calm. And then there was 3 shots, one after another. The first went through her left eye socket and out underneath her shoulder. She kind of then slumped forward. Blood was coming from her left ear. So the other 2 bullets hit a girl either side of her. One went into her friend's left hand. The other went through the other friend's left shoulder and across through her right arm. And later the friends were saying that the gunman's hand was shaking so much as he fired. It's kind of no wonder it was a bit hit and miss with his shots. And by the time she went to hospital, all her long hair was really, and also her friend's lap, they were just full of blood.
As soon as they realised what had happened, the bus went off at top speed to try and get to the hospital. Everyone was crying and screaming at this stage. Obviously, Malala, she was blacked out, didn't know what was going on. She was bleeding from her head, so a bloody bullet went through her head at this stage. You'd think she'd be goners by now, but she's still hanging on. And her left ear, some idiot policeman, man, who does this? He stopped the van, he started asking questions. Wait, what happened here? Where's it? And wasted about 5 or 10 minutes of precious time they could have been at the hospital. And someone put their hand on Malala's neck and found there was a pulse. She's still alive. We need to get her to the bloody hospital. And this sort of policeman almost ruined everything.
That's right. Eventually they did get to the local hospital, but this small local hospital was really not equipped for such a serious injury as a bullet to the head. So she was taken via ambulance to the helipad where she got a helicopter to the big city. Even the big city was not really equipped to handle this. So eventually she got a private jet across to Birmingham in the UK to get some, it was obviously going to be pretty serious treatment by this time.
Yeah, well, because she was on the global stage that the whole world was watching and knew what happened. And they were happy to throw any support they can because Malala was such a figurehead by this point that they wanted her to survive. So she got a private jet, which in normal circumstances is pretty exciting, but in this circumstance is pretty outrageous. And that's where she woke up. She woke up in a different country, in Birmingham, because she had some of the best medical doctors around to really try and get her through here and actually survive this crazy moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really the Taliban's big plan that really backfired. We talk about how things happen for different reasons. Malala says this kind of happened to her, and this was really put a spotlight on education for females and Islamic rights. She was speaking up within her country because, she just wanted herself and all the other Muslim women to be able to go to school. And this Taliban attack, all it did really, it wasn't silence her, which they hoped to do, but what they did was really elevate it to the global scale.
Yeah, the Taliban thought they would put a bullet through her head brutally and wipe her out, but all it had done is she'd survived it somehow, and because she survived it, it made her campaign for women's education global. So the Taliban, they really just shot themselves in the foot.
There you go, yeah.
Metaphorically compared to what they did to Malala.
That's right. While she was lying in that hospital bed, Gordon Brown, who was the former UK Prime Minister, he set up this petition, and the petition was called I Am Malala, and the petition was to demand all countries around the world that no child be denied schooling by the year 2015. Then she started popping up. I suppose one thing to have the former British Prime Minister in your corner.
Yeah, compared to the other stars around the world, you probably don't care about the Gordon.
That's right. And then she saw there was probably a few more exciting things. She got a handwritten card from Beyonce. Selena Gomez tweeted about her, and she even had a video message from her favourite actress and social activist, Angelina Jolie. So it was definitely global scale. Yeah, good to have a couple of prime ministers in your corner, but probably to Malala, it was probably a bit more excited to have Beyonce and Angelina Jolie fighting for her, I reckon.
So some people choose good ways of life, some people choose bad ways in life. For Malala, she was on the receiving end of someone who chose the wrong way about doing life, because once the bullet hit her, it swelled her brain, it stole her hearing, it cut the nerve of the left side of her face in the space of the second. And after that, there was actually millions of people around the world praying for her life and talented doctors who gave her own body back.
One Talib fires 3 shots at point-blank range at 3 girls in a van, doesn't kill any of them. Seems like a pretty unlikely story. People say that Malala made for a miraculous recovery as well from such an extreme condition. Malala believes that God stopped her from going to the grave, which was obviously the same God that the Taliban man thought he was fighting for as well. She really feels like she had a second life. People prayed to God to spare her, and she was spared for this reason. And the reason she says that she's got a second life is really to use it to help others.
Yeah, so that whole experience of what happened, it gave her a little microphone in the interviews, and now she'd been granted a megaphone. Mm-hmm. And again, the Taliban have still got a target on her because it's target number one, really. And even then, she's got the choice, right? After getting a bullet to the head, I go, all right, I'm going to just quiet up now. And she did quite the opposite with what, in her mind, a gift. So she went all around the world at this point, and this is really where she became more famous and speaking about women's education from America, India, France, Spain, Italy, Austria, and many other places. And at the time of writing, she said she'd been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize and being the youngest person ever to do so.
Yeah, and we know that not long after that book came out that she obviously won it and was the youngest ever winner. She used to receive, prizes for her school at work. She'd get the big A+, or she'd be the best in the class, and she was working hard for them. Now, these were pretty different, prizes that she was getting on the global scale, that she was she's kind of grateful for the awards, but she knows that it's really just a reminder of how much work there still needs to be done to achieve the goal of education for every boy and every girl all around the world.
Yeah, she doesn't want to be thought of a girl who was just shot by the Taliban. She wants to be the girl who fought for education. This is the cause that she's dedicating the rest of her life. She's got a wild speech here she gave to the UN, and I highly, highly recommend watching the documentary, because I think reading the book's one thing, but actually seeing her speak, it's like, wow, she is so bloody powerful. It's insane. But in a much more powerful voice than mine, she said, let us pick up our books and our pens. They are our most powerful weapons. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. And when you're doing a speech to the UN, you're a bit nervous about how if it's going to be a flop. But it wasn't a flop because everyone got on their feet and gave her a big standing ovation, and her father and mother and everyone was in tears because of it.
It's a big struggle. Around the world at the time of writing, there were 57 million children who were not in primary school, 32 million of them girls. In her own country, in Pakistan, it's one of the worst places. 5.1 million children don't even go to primary school, even though it is the constitutional right that every child has. And they have almost 50 million illiterate adults as a result, and 2/3 of those are women.
Yeah, so there's still so much work to do. Girls are continuing to be killed, and schools are still getting blown up even in 2022. And after all this, there's still stories of shooting attacks and bombing attacks at all girls' colleges. One, for example, had a suicide bomber who blew up a bus taking 40 pupils to an all-girls college.
Education is for every boy and every girl in the world to sit down in a chair, to read their books with their friends is their right. And for Malala, her wish is to see each and every human being with a big smile of happiness while they're sitting there reading their books.